Good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. I'm sure you've had a very busy couple of days. I am going to share with you some of my personal experiences around DCIM, IT service management, and hopefully give you some insights into if your journey is implementing ITSM already with your DCIM solution, you're thinking about it, you've done it, and it perhaps hasn't worked as well as you would have hoped. You're thinking of implementing some form of DCIM solution, and you've already got service management, and you're looking for some ideas about what would be the right thing to do and how you do that. This is the journey we're going to go on to today. We're going to talk a little bit about why. We're going to talk about, is there a way that we can get more out of bringing these two things together than simply just having solution A and solution B? First of all, just a little level set. When I talk about DCIM, I mean more than just power monitoring. I mean the whole management of the infrastructure. And I also mean modeling in a sense that bringing every piece of information together in one model. I don't necessarily mean one vendor's model, but the concept of one whole holistic model in order that you can leverage that information better. So when I talk about ITSM, for those people who are not quite sure what it is, or at least so that we can get a level set on the language, to me, ITSM really defines the business applications. It's the process by which you enable the applications for your customers, your end users, to work. It's the process that you go through in order to run it, change it, and decommission it. In contrast, DCIM is about documenting the physical environment on which those applications run. The power, the network connectivity, the cooling. And for me, the sweet spot is when you join those two things together in the right way, because you find that the ITSM process gets more efficient. You start to achieve cost effectiveness and your risks reduce. So this is the bit that we're going to be talking about, that sweet spot, and how do we get there. So there's a little story from my past. 10 or so years ago, I was working for a company that made the intelligent infrastructure management products, the intelligent patching. And I looked after the European territory, and one of my partners is a Dutch company. And when I first engaged with them and said, so we've got this intelligent patching. It's this ninth wire stuff. He says, yeah. So when are you going to start selling some? I said, well, I don't get it. So well, when you connect up a patch cord, the database updates itself automatically. Right? So, yeah, and if someone disconnects something in error, you get an alarm. Why? Oh, because it's got sensors. So no. Why would they disconnect it in error? Why would they do something out of process? And I was introduced for the first time to the world of the Dutch and process management. And at that time, 12 years ago actually, 80% of the businesses in Holland had an IT service management platform based around ITIL. For them, process was a natural thing. It moved its way to the UK, and eventually now, here, living and working in the US, I start to see the emergence of ITSM. The good thing is that we don't call it process management, because if you're anything like me, when you start talking about processes, you start to get a bit of an icky feeling inside. You don't really want to do it. So the good news is we called it something else. IT service management is far more palatable. Now, what do we mean by IT service management such that I can set it up that DCIM makes sense in a moment? Well, everything in ITSM starts with a request and is focused around a change order. That change order normally has some CIs associated with it, configuration items, things. Let's assume for now we'll just call them servers. A bunch of servers called CIs that have a stack of attributes about them, things that I know about this device, or things that I want to have achieved as a result of putting this in. So that would typically be, where is it? How much memory has it got? Who made it? What's the serial number? What did it cost me? When do I have to give it back? What security platform has to run on it? What applications run on it? These are all of the attributes that a CI contains. Now, in the ITSM world, those logical attributes tend to sit in an ITSM CMDB. Any more acronyms, please? The logical stuff sits in that. The DCIM CMDB should be where you would hold the physical. Where is it? How is it connected to power? How is it connected to the network? How is it connected to storage? Notice that they are two separate places, and you'll see as we go through why it's important to distinguish between the two. Now, from a DCIM perspective, a CI, like a server, will typically have 5 or 7 decision points. Location, space, power, network, security, rights, and maybe a couple of other bits depending upon your environment. So having decided that you're going to make a change and you've gathered together your CIs, you then have to assess, is this change going to cause a problem? A risk assessment. Assuming that the risk assessment is a good one, you move forward. You create work orders, you distribute what it is you want people to do, they go away and do it, hopefully in the manner which you intended, and then you update your records to reflect the changes that you've done. Simple, if you're Dutch. And ultimately, you go back to the start, and you use the same information that you've just used and updated to start planning again and again and again. Now, in the case of a handful of CIs, it's fairly straightforward. The complexity isn't that great. The reality is that it tends to be more like this. A major upgrade can spawn hundreds and hundreds of changes. And with 7 decision points against each CI potentially, the complexity of that is quite astonishing if you start to get your head around it. And as the complexity increases, as the number of changes increases, the complexity increases exponentially. And that is a challenge to us. And this is really what the essence of this talk is about. Start to get you to think about the challenges that you may face when you bring your ITSM and DCIM together. It's about complexity. There's an axiom that says that as individuals, we can only become a little bit smarter day by day in very small increments. There's nothing we can do to increase our capabilities exponentially. That makes sense, right? Data centers and IT in general, on the other hand, has this ability to become incredibly complex really quickly. And there's a point where they intersect. We're way past that. We're at a point where our ability as an individual to deal with the complexity of the environment we've got is way beyond our capability. Now, we make up for that by, well, not quite not managing everything as well as we could. We're not perfect, we say. But it has impacts. Capacity optimization is one of the biggest impacts that we see in customers like you, where the complexity continues to increase and you're unable to manage all of those environments. So one would suggest that perhaps now is the time to change. Is it possible for us to be able to do something about that? Bear in mind that IT is not going to change, the environment that we work in is not going to change, and we can't do something about it. So is there anything else we can do to help ourselves to become more efficient, to cost less, and be safer in the process? Many years ago, I worked for a Swiss company who make, amongst other things, fiber optic patch cables. And when I was setting up a production facility in the United Kingdom using their tools and techniques, I was introduced to this term, PokeYoke, which normally makes people giggle. It is something that I've become to understand as being really, really powerful and common sense. But what they demonstrated to me, the Swiss company, when I was looking at a production facility, was they understood that the end product that came out the ability for it to pass was determined by a number of factors along the way, the people and the processes. The processes will be consistent because they're just logical. It's the people part is the bit that always gets in the way. And they analysed every step along the way to their end result of a patch cable that works with high quality and said at every stage, is there something that could happen here that will cause it to not be quite right and as a consequence would affect it failing at the end? The consequence of failure was you had to make another one. And it was a 25-minute process to get from the start to the end. So what they did was they engineered out the human factor. So, by example, the little ceramic ferrule that the fibre goes inside, you have to put glue in there, resin. And what they know is that if too much glue goes in there, some of it will go back and it will wick back along the fibre and it will get into the spring and it will seize the spring. Or it will make it too rigid and it won't pass the cycle tests. So what they did was they engineered their own tiny little Teflon nipples that would go over the syringe for every different connector type so that when you put the syringe in, only the glue would go forward, it wouldn't go back. And the amount of glue that had to go in there had to be very precise because they didn't want too much glue coming out because the next process depended upon the little bump of hard glue when it went to the polishing machines, because if they were out of balance, that would affect the minute symmetry of these connectors as they went forward. So they looked at every little part of the process, engineered in or out little things in this PokeYoke form that caused you to be completely confident that at the end of the process, it would always work, or as near as, damn it, right? If you apply that thinking, it comes from Toyota. If you apply that thinking into your ITSM strategy about how you're going to marry up with DCIM, you will find yourself having that same experience of confidence that we did with our manufacturing facility. The question is, how does one do that? Well, I said everything starts with change, and it starts with a CI. Configuration item. Here's an example of a CI within our toolset. Now, your ITSM CMDB will have things like how high is it, how heavy is it, who made it, how many slots does it have perhaps, how much power does it consume, how much temperature does it generate. We also capture the things that your network people have decided have to happen in order for this device to create the business application that you want. The network configurations, where does it have to connect to? What IP ranges or VLANs? The network, how much storage? How resilient should it be? What management ports should it connect to? Should the power be resilient? Should it be fed to certain zones? By capturing all of that and documenting everything in that one way, and feeding it into and out of a DCIM solution, what I've done is I've pre-conditioned myself to be more successful than I would have done without it. And here's why. Because if I've captured all of that information, all I need to do now is use an enormous amount of logic to figure out where it can go. So here's an example. Here's a video off of the screen from our app using our commission search. And it's not about the tool itself, it's about the principles, it's about the idea, about what it is possible to do in the same way the little glue nipple helped the fiber connector. In my commission search model, I'm going to choose which data center I'm going to try and put these devices into. I'm going to select my CI, we call them library items. It's pre-configured. I know all the connections, how it needs to be connected, how much it's going to consume, how heavy it is, and so on. I'm going to choose 3 of them, because 3 is harder than 1. But I'm not going to do 20, because it will take too long for this presentation. I'm going to select where I want it to go. It could be dev test, it could be production services, where I'm going to put it. And I'm going to ask the model now, show me all the places that it can fit, and all the places that it can't. And all the red places, it won't fit or it's not supposed to, and the green ones are the only two places where it will fit. And whilst fit and other attributes. So I've got two choices of cabinet, one slightly different to the other in terms of its capacity availability, and I'm going to choose one of them based on my preference. And having chosen that, I'm now going to say, you're the one. You're the cabinet I'm going to put these devices in. So I'm now starting the change process of, let's start planning to put these devices in. When do you want it to start? When do you want it to finish? Typical ITSM stuff. And I start to load up the model with the devices. Server 1, Server 2, Server 3. I could change the names here if that was the right place to do it. And note here, this is the list of the NICs and the connection points and the services that it's seeking. Because right now, those devices are going to do their best to auto-route themselves to all the connection points that they need within that data center, whilst being respectful for my rules, patching hop lengths, connection lengths, routing zones, all of those things. And it's going to do that and show it to me now. What I'm going to do now is I'm now going to wind forward into the future. The little slider moves forward, and you'll see the model changing as the servers start to be applied to the model. Notice that it's done all of the patching calculations for me, following my rules. And not only is I'm seeing mine, I'm seeing what someone else has planned as well. And just in case you haven't noticed it, I'm going to wind it back. We'll zoom in a little bit, and I'll allow you to see it in reverse. This is really important because this is the risk component. What would happen if I did this? Will it break something? Will too much be consumed? Is this the right thing to do? This ability to understand the future, as I describe here, is I can see current draw and future draw, current capacity and future capacity. The impact. I can reverse out of this. This isn't true at the moment. And I've created over 60 work actions in 2 minutes. Back to my little Dutch friend. All the specific instructions that require to happen in order to put those things in the right place in the way in which meets your policies. Does that seem somewhat like the reduction of complexity that we would get if we applied some smart thinking by using a CI that's well configured up front so that I can leverage it further down the process? It does to me, right? If I can marry together the organizational people, can I get the IT people to start thinking about the role that DCIM plays? Can I get the DCIM people to start thinking about the role that ITSM plays, such that you can have a joined-up conversation about making life easier, faster, more secure than you would have done otherwise? And there is a human component to this as well. I would guess that there's at least a few people in here that have purchased and implemented a software solution that you expected to go really well, and technically it was good, but it just bombed. Because the people just couldn't get their head around it. It wasn't a natural thing. It was hard work. And we know that when something is hard, people naturally find ways around it. Anybody here who's ever tried to use some sort of sales forecasting system, the best salespeople who really can't be bothered just somehow circumnavigate the process. Now, we could accept that to be true and just get on with it and notice that it's all going to go wrong, or we could try and find ways to recognize both the technology and the human component. I can't think of a better reason or a better example of moving from the VHS to TiVo. If you can remember pre-TiVo, that's the little cassette that you'd put in, and somebody would sit there and program, I want this channel to be recorded at 8 p.m. until 8:30, too, just in case it ran on a little bit. And that worked for a little while, and eventually you got sick of that, and you decided to create Dad's cassette. And you just put the whole cassette in, you press record and walk away. And you'd have 3 hours of stuff you'd have to whiz through, and eventually you'd find what you needed to find. But even then, that didn't really suit what you needed, and then TiVo arrived. And all of a sudden, the application was put in the hands of the greatest point of use, the most appropriate point of use. That is, while I'm out at work, my DVR is being filled up with complete rubbish because my wife can. Because she is the person who can just pick up the remote and go, that, series record, and it's done. She wouldn't have gone through the pain of programming the VCR to do all those things. She just found another reason to do something else. Now, it just simply works. That is a PokeYoke methodology. Point, click, do, done. iPod, exactly the same thing. When iPods first came out, acoustically, the best media player? No, rubbish in comparison. But they just worked. Could you change the name of the track? Could you delete a track from a playlist from it? No. But it just worked. The way in which they engineered it matched the people, not the technology. If you want your ITSM and your DCIM to deliver the real benefits, you have to think like that. It doesn't have to be the best, but it has to be something that will work with the people you've got in your organization. So this marriage, and I'm thankful to the marketing department to give me this title set up. Your DCIM solution, if it follows along the path from ITSM through into DCIM, it has its part to play in assisting you in decision-making and impact analysis. If you try to do it without, I challenge you to try and do this really well in an ITSM solution without this. It's not possible. So it has to allow you early on to impact that decision-making. It should allow you to create a dynamic model of the future state. What would happen if I did this? And not just about how much power, but how much power and the network connections and the capacity and the impact on temperature and the impact on other services too, to impact that decision. And then further down, allow you to distribute the work actions and the description of what I want you to do in such a way that fits the way the human wants to interact with that. When you do that, you suddenly move into this very valuable area where you're getting more, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. What if I did this? How many could I put in there? The scenarios that you could run in your head around changing capacity, changing models, changing cost, adapting to new technologies are incredible. Knowing that, your data will continue to be accurate because you've planned in an accurate way. It was Gartner said many, many years ago, the greatest impact on change is when people and processes collide. Technology very rarely fails unless somebody gets their eager little fingers involved in it. And the problem is that when it fails, they try to use the same information that got them into trouble in the first place to undo it. So we need to cut that. And this is where a little bit of forethought, a little bit of out-of-the-box PokeYoke thinking will get you into a much better place. Your efficiency in your services will go up, your risks will reduce, and ultimately your costs will reduce. We see a lot of hidden cost in our infrastructures because of our inability to manage all of that change. Little model here. Talk to you a little bit about what I mean as the actual model itself. Here is a data center modeled inside our tool set. Everything you see is a database object. It's something that was put there because it was planned to go there. It's something that real and lives and exists. It's the power and the IT together. Stripping back the layers, those people who are responsible or only care about certain things can see what they want to see. It's all there because you planned it to be there. It will all disappear when you plan for it to disappear. And yet you can see IT and power at the same time. So let me just focus in on one particular server. Hide everything that's not associated with it and see what we can see. We can see the device itself, the server and the switch in relation to each other, the cables that connect to them. We can see the power in the red and the blue, how that's connected together. That's everything that's associated with that one particular device. I've really scaled it down into something really simple. Now, if I come from the other end, if I come from a power end and go to a PDU and say, what would happen if this failed? What would be the impact? Everything in red failed. Everything in yellow survived. Everything in blue is at risk because it's connected to stuff in yellow. The interrelatedness between connections, IT, and power is something you have to see to understand. It's very difficult to get that in a report. When you model things like this together fully, you start to appreciate that this whole model is something that different departments can all understand together. And when it comes to an ITSM perspective, you can start to see that the decisions you make early on really are drawn from what's in a model like this or a similar methodology for modeling the relationships between everything. So I urge you to consider this. If you're going down an ITSM journey that you're going to connect up with your DCIM, I urge you to consider the upstream. Walk backwards. Live in the shoes of the IT people if you come from a DCIM world. And if you're in the ITSM world, go live in the DCIM world for a little while and understand that you can both get value from each other's data, you can share that data, and you can capitalize upon that such that it's better than if you lived separately. The DCIM should give you the where can I? What would happen if? And what will it take? If it can't do that, you've probably bought a monitoring system. You need to upgrade. So, going back to my lovely marriage analogy, to live happily ever after, you need a place for everything and everything in its place. That is, an ITSM CMDB is not the most appropriate place for most DCIM information. It's not. Likewise, a DCIM solution is not the most appropriate place for most of your ITSM stuff too. Respect the human element. Respectful to each other. Understand that people enact these processes, and therefore you should be making sure that they are going to keep stuff up to date for you. And plan to federate your data and your processes together to get the best outcome. As with all good marriage counseling or pre-marriage counseling, choose your partner wisely. Thank you. I think it's customary to open up for any questions, abuse, advice.
How would you represent a hybrid environment where you're off to assets that sit on the cloud environment you don't even know about? That can show them a block, this relationship?
It depends on if it's important for you to understand how that's connected. If it's the responsibility of someone else to do that, and that they provide you with a service level, then you would just have that as some form of the most important attributes to you. The how it, stuff being off in colo, that's fine. But it's your colo, it ought to be your colo's responsibility to manage that for you. And for you to have some insight into, are you making the best choice for me in doing that? Okay. Other than that, thank you very much.